Hey guys, welcome to my channel. We're doing an audiobook for introduction through chapter 1 through 10 with the collected. So I just finished this part of the book, which is awesome. I love it. Oh my goodness. I did get permission from Scholastic to do this as well. Yeah, I love this book. Oh my goodness. I definitely recommend to read this book. It's really scary and spooky, but I love it. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's really scary but spooky. Yeah, so I am just going to start reading. Alrighty. Introduction. I've always had a strange fascination with dolls. For as long as I could remember, they'd been my favorite toy. I never knew why. It's not that I especially enjoyed dressing them up or even playing make-believe. It's more like dolls always seemed like friends. Better friends than real people, or better than my big sister Josie, at least. Dolls were always there for me, to listen, to help, to share. Maybe that's why I like them so much. At night, I could hear them talking, could hear them whispering secrets that made me feel a little less alone, a little less strange. The only person who made me feel that way was my Grandma Jeanie. Until she was gone. Dolls don't die on you when you need them the most. Dolls don't abandon you. Dolls live forever. They are the perfect family, the perfect friends. I've always had a strange fascination, oh my goodness, fascination with dolls, but I suppose that's not all. Dolls have also had a strange fascination with me. If only I had known that fascination would turn deadly. Chapter 1. One of my first memories is of my doll putting her hands around my throat. I was 4, maybe 5. I was in my bedroom playing with my toys. A stuffed bear, a stuffed bird, a princess doll. Princess Honeysickle was my favorite. We went on the most exciting adventures together. Sometimes we flew to the moon and ruled over aliens. Other times, we cast magical spells over our enemies. This time, I think we were playing house. It's hard to remember. I just remember that one moment I was lying on the ground playing with Mr. Bear and Miss Parrot. I looked over and saw that Princess Honeysickle wasn't on her throne, ruling over her kingdom. It wasn't the first time she'd gone missing like that, but it was the first time it happened in the middle of playtime. Normally, she just vanished when I went to bed, and I would blame my sister for coming in and stealing my toys while I was asleep. Not that Josie ever admitted what she's done. The doll would always show up after I yelled at her. Though, in a day or two, I was about to call out to Josie. Maybe she'd snuck in while I was paying attention. And that's what I felt. That's when I felt it. 2 tiny hands on my neck, wrapping around my throat behind me. I yelled and sat up, tossing my stuffed animals to the side as I grabbed for whatever was squeezing me. I found Princess Honeysickle smiling at me. Her lips and her eyes were tinged with red. Her arms were open, as wide as my neck. Maybe it was my imagination, but I remember her head twisting around all the way around, and a giggle coming from somewhere deep inside her plastic body. Then my mom came in. She had heard me scream. "Are you okay, Anna?" she asked. "The doll," I said. Except when I looked at Princess Honeysickle again, she looked perfectly normal. Plastic smile, dazed eyes, arms serenely her side. Mom took the doll. I never saw it again. Chapter 2. It didn't take long to sense that something was wrong with me. Princess Honeysuckle was the first doll I remember playing with, but she wasn't the last, nor was she the last to go. Strange. When I was in first grade, I remember playing with other girls at recess. It was winter. After the holidays, we had show and tell that morning, and everyone brought their own new toys. Most of the girls had gotten new dolls, and we sat playing together in our corner of the gym while a blizzard stormed outside. Even in first grade, I didn't really have friends. I remember being so excited because dolls were the one thing I felt comfortable around. Maybe dolls could help me make new friends. I couldn't have been more wrong. My new doll, Adventurer Aurora, was the coolest doll I've ever had. She came in with all sorts of neat gadgets, binoculars and a jeep, a working compass. Even Josie was jealous of her. Back then, Josie and I were still friends. Back then, she still treated me like her sister. Adventurer Aurora was investigating a forgotten tomb with my new friend's doll, Mountaineer Mary, with Justina. The girl I was playing with got up to go to the bathroom. I carried on playing with her. The doll crept deeper into my shoebox caves, avoiding acid bats and fire mummies. And when Justina came back, she yelped out in fear. "What are you doing?" she asked. I was confused playing. I told her I grabbed the Mountaineer Mary and kicked her over the shoebox cave, leaving Adventurer Aurora to climb out from the rumble. Justina ran over to the rest of the girls and started whispering. I remember them looking at me strangely. I just dipped my head and went back to playing with Aurora. As the weeks passed, I watched how many friends played with their dolls. I realized why Justina had been so freaked out. It wasn't my fault, though, really. How was I supposed to know that dolls were only supposed to move if you were moving them? How was I supposed to know that dolls shouldn't be able to walk or crawl or adventure on their own? I thought that was how everyone played with dolls. I didn't realize that everyone else's dolls were just pieces of animated plastic. When I played with my dolls, they played back. Chapter 3. When I was 7, we went to visit my grandmother, and I ended up staying for a whole year. I didn't remember much about that time. I spent so many nights trying to remember what happened, but it's like the part of me blocked it out, and Josie refused to talk about it like she was scared. But why would she be scared of the time we spent at Grandma Jeannie's? Grandma was a sweet old woman who lived in a big house by the woods. I remember that much. Just like I remembered she had a lot of rules to live by. Maybe that's why Josie didn't like talking about it. She hated rules. I didn't remember much about the school and the town, though. I did remember not really having friends except for one. I just couldn't remember her name. I also didn't remember what she did all year, though. Sometimes I woke up in the dead of night yelling. Something told me it had to do with our stay at Grandma Jeannie's, but it didn't tell me why. The one thing I could remember was Grandma Jeannie. When I was with her, everything seemed to be okay. We'd moved there because Mom had lost her job and Grandma was getting old and losing her memory. Being around Grandma when she couldn't remember who we were was always really hard. But when she was old, her old self, she was my friend. We couldn't talk about anything and everything except for dolls. That was the one rule of Grandma Jeannie. I couldn't remember, maybe because it didn't make any sense to me. No dolls in the house. It was hard to be angry with her about it, though I didn't need dolls with her around. She was my best friend, my only friend. That was about the time Josie started treating me like I was a stranger, one she didn't want to hang around. It hurt my feelings because we used to be close. I even remember sleeping in her room a couple times when I was scared of something waiting in the woods outside my window. When Josie was too distant or Mom was too busy, Grandma Jeanie was there to take care of me, to make sure I was okay and happy and heard. I knew living there wasn't perfect, but when Grandma Jeanie was her old self, my friendship with her was... When my mom got a new job in the city, it was clear Grandma Jeanie could be on her own again. We left. It was one of the worst days of my life. I'll never forget waving to Grandma as she watched us from the front porch with tears in her eyes. I just wish I could remember why a place that felt more like home than Chicago ever did could still give me nightmares. Chapter 4. After we left, Josie vowed she would never step foot in the grandma's house again. We were back in Chicago in our new, slightly bigger apartment. I was in my room playing with the dolls I hadn't seen in nearly a year, using their storage boxes as mansions and mountains. Mom was out getting groceries when Josie passed by my room. She must have seen me playing through the cracked door. Immediately, she stormed in and grabbed the dolls from my hands. "Never!" she growled. "You are never playing with these again." I can't believe after everything we went through, after everything that happened to you. What happened? I asked, because I couldn't remember and I knew I should remember, and this was as close as admitting what happened as Josie had ever gotten. She breathed heavily, clearly angry. I almost thought she was going to throw the dolls at me. I'd never seen her this mad before. Instead, she chucked the dolls into the storage box. "Hey!" I yelled. I tried to stop her, but she was bigger than me. I grabbed her arm as she picked up more dolls and threw them into the box. She yelped, jumped back. She shook out her hand as if I had shocked her. For a brief moment, the skin where I had grabbed her looked different, like porcelain. Then it faded. Through her anger, didn't it? She gathered up the rest of my dolls and threw them all in a box, hefting it up and glaring at me. "This is all Grandma Jeanie's fault," she said. "We are never going back there. Never." Then she turned and stormed down the hall. I heard the door open and slam. I wanted to run after her and stop her, but but the shock of what happened rooted me to the spot. When she came back in, the box was nowhere to be seen. She'd thrown my dolls in the dumpster outside. No matter how hard I cried that night, no matter how much I wished they would come back, I knew I've never seen them again. Without Grandma Jeanie or my dolls, I felt terribly alone. And from there, it only got worse. Chapter 5. On my 9th birthday, Mom got me a doll. I was so ecstatic when I opened the package. A new astronaut Amy doll. Just what I always wanted. Mom smiled at my happiness. Josie flipped out. She grabbed the doll and started yelling, saying that she wasn't going to stay here if there were dolls in the house, that our apartment needed to become a doll-free zone. She threw out astronaut Amy before I even got a chance to unwrap her. Mom was clearly upset. She scolded Josie, but she didn't ground my sister. In fact, she took Josie's side. That hurt my feelings more than anything else. Later that night, while I was crying myself to sleep over what was easily the worst birthday ever, the only good thing was the card from Grandma Jeanie, where she said I could come back and stay whenever I wanted. Mom came in and sat down on my bed. She tried to soothe me for a little bit. "Here," she said, and handed me a wrapped present. I thought maybe it was the astronaut Amy, but it was some board game I knew I'd never play. I wanted to throw it in the trash before I could ask Mom why she had let Josie throw away my toys. She ruined any hope I have to having a real conversation. It's clear dolls upset your sister, she said. So, I think it's best if we just give her this one, okay? No dolls in the house. It will be just like at your grandma's, except there had been Grandma Jeanie. I had Grandma Jeanie to talk to. Here, I don't have anyone. I didn't say that, though. I didn't say anything. I knew in the moment that Mom had taken Josie's side, and Josie didn't want me to have dolls or friends or to be happy. Mom kissed me goodnight and left. Later, as I was falling asleep, I swore I heard Josie pause outside my door. I swore I heard her whisper, "It's for your own good." That night, I dreamed of a cabin in the woods, cackling laughter, a shadowy monster with glowing white eyes, and dolls, hundreds and hundreds of dolls. The next day, when I woke up, Astronaut Amy was sitting at my counter staring at me. I didn't take any chance. My tears in my eyes, I threw her in the trash outside before Josie could find her. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I closed the bin lid, "but you have to stay here." It felt like burying my last friend. Chapter 6. Grandma Jeanie was the only person who seemed to see me. When she was able to see me, it seemed like her memory was getting worse and worse. Sometimes she and I would talk for hours. Other times we would go the whole weekend without her knowing who Mom and I were. Josie never came with us. I thought it was horribly rude, especially after Grandma became sick. But Josie always had a reason to stay home, an excuse, things to study for, soccer games, and even homework. After that year-long visit, I don't think Josie ever saw Grandma Jeanie again. Save for one time we brought Grandma Jeanie to Chicago for the holidays. That time didn't count either, because Grandma Jeanie spent those days believing she was 17 again and kept thinking about my mom was her mom. Josie tried to laugh it off, but I knew she was sad. I heard her crying in her room when Mom took Grandma Jeanie back home. But the times when it was just Grandma Jeanie and me, when she was fully aware of who she was and where she were, those were some of the best times of my life. Sitting on the porch drinking sun tea, talking about life and school, she always told me that it was okay that I didn't have friends right now. I was different from everyone else, like she was. That made me unique, special. She thought I was special. Josie just thought I was weird. Sometimes Grandma Jeanie would tell me other things. Things that made more sense than they should have. She said that people like her and me saw the world differently. We saw the life force in all things. That was why sometimes it felt like I wasn't alone in an empty room. Or why I often felt like I was being watched. She said that I had to be patient with Josie because she didn't see things the same way I did. We had our own talents, our own things that made us special, but mine, Grandma said, mine set me apart. I tell her about all the strange things that happened to me, like when I'd wake up in the middle of the night hearing whispers, or when I saw things that weren't there from the corner of my eye, and she listened and understood and didn't judge. The one thing I never told her about was the dolls. Not after the first time I'd mentioned them to her. She got so upset, started yelling, saying I must avoid them at all costs because they were her tools. I didn't know who she was talking about, but she kept looking to the woods behind her house when she said it, scared. So the dolls remained my secret, how they spoke to me, how they moved around me, how sometimes I felt more like a doll than a human kid. The dolls felt more human than anyone in school, like Grandma Jeanie. The dolls had always seemed to understand me, until Josie made sure to take them away. Chapter 7. Back home, I felt I was walking through a different world. Nobody saw things the way I saw them, especially Josie. Ever since our time living with Grandma Jeanie, the things that made me feel different only grew stronger and harder to keep secret. I did my best to keep them from Josie and Mom. I even kept them secret from Grandma Jeanie because it wasn't the whispers in the night or the sensations that could feel more than most people. It was the dolls. Even though I wasn't allowed dolls in the house, I still encountered them. The worst was the sleepover. It had been a really strange morning. I woke up from the nightmares that had been trapped in the cabin filled with tiny porcelain dolls, all of them with their eyes crossed out with marker. Nightmares of giant shadow in the corner getting bigger, growing closer, devouring the dolls one by one, until its tendrils wrapped around me and swallowed all of the lights, laughing manically. Maybe that was why I felt off when I met up with my friends. Alicia and Suji were the only girls who were willing to hang out with me, and it took all my concentration not to act strangely around them. We were walking down the street of Chicago, and Alyssa said we should run to the toy store to pick up toys and games for our sleepover that night. My gut dropped at the thought. Toy store meant only one thing, dolls. But I agreed, because, like I said, I didn't want to them to think I was weird. And what kind of kid doesn't want to go to the toy store? It started innocently enough. We walked to the board game section first, and after a few minutes we picked out a couple games to play that night. I could have sighed with relief as we headed back to the register until we walked past the doll section. I felt like my stomach dropped to my feet. I dragged my feet the entire way through the doll aisle. With every step I felt something within my building, a static, a buzz that filled my ears and made my fingers tingle. I tried to focus on everything except the countless dolls staring at me with their eyes burning the back of my neck. I could feel them, hundreds of them, staring at me from behind their plastic screens. The tingle within me grew. I could hear them, all of them, whispering to me, calling my name, some of them young, childlike, but one was old and creepy, raced by like a wind around gravestones. Anna, 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 Alyssa called. Earth to Anna, hurry up. I jolted and looked up. At that moment, the buzzing inside me snapped. So too did the head of every doll in the aisle. All of them snapping to attention, staring straight at me. Alyssa didn't seem to notice. She and Suji were at the end of the aisle, watching me impatiently. I didn't walk the rest of the way to them. I ran. Chapter 8. I try not to think about the sleepover. I try not to think about what happened, mostly because when I called Mom to pick me up from Elisa's house after the disastrous attempt at a sleepover, Mom was also in tears. She wouldn't tell me why over the phone. When she picked me up, her eyes were puffy and red, just like mine. She didn't ask me why I wanted to come home in the middle of the night. Didn't ask why I was crying. Your grandmother died, she said, and everything good and solid in my world disappeared. Chapter 9. Now we were returning to Grandma Jeanie's house. Even Josie had to go. Not that Josie didn't put a fight. You'd have thought that, given the circumstance, she would have been more understanding. Would have been nicer, but she yelled and screamed when Mom said we were going to go back to Grandma Jeanie's. She tried to come up with every excuse she could think of, but there was no getting out of it. She was coming to the funeral. She was going to help us pack Grandma Jeannie's things so Mom could sell the house. I think that finally was what convinced Josie to go. The knowledge that soon the house would be gone and she'd never have to go back, ever. It made me hate her even more, that she could be so happy about things that made me so sad. I felt like the entire drive was a bad dream. It was enough to make me forget what happened at the sleepover, enough to make me forget about dolls and strange events or nightmares. This was a living nightmare. Grandma Jeanie was gone. She was gone. And there was no one else in the world who would listen to me or understand me. She was gone. And so we were going back to the house and the time I could barely remember. Back to say goodbye for the last time to my grandmother, to my friend, to the only person who could help me with the girl I was starting to become. That is the end of chapter 9. I'm getting to chapter 10 now. Chapter 10. We drove back from the funeral in silence. We were wearing black, all three of us, and it was raining hard on the rental car, drowning out the emptiness within. For a little while, I had been grateful for the rain, because the water dripping from my hair was hiding my tears. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the closed black casket and the roses I'd scattered on top of it. Every time I took a breath, I remember that Grandma Jeanie was no longer with us. Mom tried to tell us that Grandma Jeanie was resting now, that she was in a better place, but it didn't feel like that to me. It felt like the end, a horrible, terrible end, and I wanted to kick and scream and cry, anything that would make Grandma Jeanie come back to me. I knew it wouldn't work. That made it worse. It didn't help that nothing in the town felt familiar or like home anymore. The only thing that had felt right about this place since we had left had been Grandma Jeanie. Without her here, everything felt wrong. We passed by the post office and the school and the grocery store, and even though it was only 4 in the afternoon, everything was closed and shuttered. Shuttered. No people walking the streets or even driving past. It was like everyone had taken the day off for Grandma's funeral. Although very few had eventually shown up. The mayor, a woman with bright red hair who stood at the back and looked vaguely familiar behind her black veil, a librarian, and my mom and Josie and me. Grandma Jeanie didn't have many friends. People thought she was strange. "Can't believe you're making us come back here," Josie said from the back seat. I glared at her from the rear view. She was staring out the window, but her eyes were tight. She cried during the funeral, but now she didn't look sad. She looked scared, under her breath. I heard her whisper, "It isn't safe." Mom didn't hear her, at least not the second part. "Josie," she said patiently, looking in the rear view mirror. "I know coming back is hard for you. Hard on you. It's hard on all of us, but I need you to be supportive, okay? We'll just be here a few days, and then we'll be gone for good." Her voice choked on the last few words. I glanced over to see another tear fall down her cheek. Josie just looked more miserable. I couldn't tell if she was upset because she made Mom cry, or because of what we were about to do. The idea of going through Grandma's stuff made me feel weird inside, wrong. But then everything about this weird and wrong, Grandma Jeanie couldn't be dead. Shouldn't be. She shouldn't have left me like this. Mom didn't say anything else, and we were left in awkward silence. Just the sound of the rain and the swishing of wipers when we were passed at a stop sign. I reached towards the radio knob and turned it on. As I did so, I felt a tingle in the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I turned to look out the window, and there, on the corner of the street, was the first person I'd seen since leaving the funeral, standing outside with a big black umbrella tilted and hid his face. Except when I looked at him, he tilted the umbrella back. It wasn't a human face. It was a doll's. I gasped, but at that moment, the next song on the radio started playing, drowning out the sound. Mom pulled over. Then I glanced back, and it was just a normal guy waiting across the street. Not a doll at all. What? Josie asked. She suddenly seemed on the high alert. Nothing, I lied. Just thought I knew him. I knew she would freak out on me if I mentioned anything about dolls. Josie grumbled something under her breath, but thankfully that, too, was swallowed by the radio. That wasn't the first time something like that happened. It had been going on for as long as I could remember. It was part of the reason kids at school avoided me. They said I was cursed. Always jumping at nothing, seeing things that weren't there, seeing dolls that weren't there. Whatever it was, it seemed to be happening more and more frequently lately. That and the nightmares. It's only for a few days, Mom said, out of nowhere. It sounded like she was trying to reassure herself as much as she was us. Just a few days of sorting and packing, and then professionals will come in and take care of the rest. She looked over to me, smiled sadly, and then we can go home. I tried to smile back at her. She knew that this place would always be more of a home to me than Chicago, no matter how nice our apartment was. But when we pulled up to the front drive, I stared at Grandma's big 3-story house with its faded wrap-around porch. Fear logged in my chest. It felt like something was waiting for me deep in the dark shadows of the enormous windows. The windows that had always been filled with light before. The house looked terribly empty, but the dark presence, that prinkling on the back of my neck, told me that we weren't alone. Mom turned off the car and jumped out, jogging towards the covered porch to avoid as much rain as possible. I put my hand on the door handle and felt a small tingle of electricity. I paused before opening the door. Surrounding Grandma's house, just past the sweeping lawn, was the forest, so thick and tangled it didn't seem like anyone could pass through it. And yet the trees seemed alive, moving and twisting in the wind and rain, as they were filled with monsters, or were monsters themselves. I squinted. Was that something moving in the branches? Something pale and porcelain? Do you remember her rules? Josie asked from the back seat. I jumped at the sound of her voice. I couldn't remember, but I didn't want her to know that. She leaned forward between the seats, so she was facing me. Don't leave the windows open at night, she said. Her voice was heavy. Memories stirred. No dolls in the house, she continued. The third rule spilled from my lips in the time with her words. And never, ever go to the house in the woods, we said at the same time. She stared at me knowingly for a long moment, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't say anything mean to me. She just looked deadly serious. Don't forget them, she said. Girls, Mom called. Her voice barely carried over the sound of the rain. She waved at us from the front porch. The door was open and she turned the lights on. I don't like this, I whispered. The words spilled from my lips before I could stop them. But rather than making fun of me for being weak, Josie stared at Mom with fear plain on her face. Neither do I, she said. Alright, that is the end of Chapter 10. I will see you guys in the next video for Chapter 11.